Media literacy is on the decline. There is no nuance to be had when discussing characters, themes, and plot. I am making this video mainly to put my own thoughts together, but rest assured, everything I outline will be well thought out. When engaging with a story, be that a book or a movie, it is important to keep in mind that the point of the story is not merely to entertain. It is impossible to create a story without imbuing it with some sort of political or social commentary. The story itself was born into and exists in the world. It does not come from nothing.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
What Kamala Harris said might be funny, but no lies were told. We as a society forget that there are people all around us and that we are products of a system. Everything we do contributes to the system. Nothing else in human history has ever existed outside of it. This can be applied to stories because they are, above all, manifestations of the real world. So what's the point of a story? I think what I've been alluding to is a pretty obvious answer. The theme in a story is what lives on in the minds of the audience. Each observer or reader will take away their favorite aspect of the story or what impacted them the most, and this can be the characters, plot, setting, or anything else. But the one thing that touches on all aspects of a story is the theme, the moral lesson. While this might be the obvious answer, I do not think that most people believe in it, even if they say they do. This is most harmful when it is the writer leaning towards one story aspect rather than tying it all together with a theme, but the refusal or inability to acknowledge the theme is a burden that lies with the audience as well. Throughout this video, I am going to be talking about the dangers of what comes with leaning towards one aspect rather than attempting a balance from a writer's and reader's point of view, and then I'll be discussing where the author's intention comes into all of this. The point of the story is the characters. The characters in a story are there to represent people and traits. They are an insert of all our feelings, desires, and fears. A character serves as the eyes of a story. It is the person we are observing the story through. A character can make or break a story's effectiveness. They have to be consistent with their backgrounds and character developments. You can't get to point C without going through point B. The lens the character provides into the story can greatly affect the story's direction. Have them grow up privileged, and their actions must reflect that. Who the character is affects what is most important to them, and therefore what they will spend the story reaching for. Abusing the role of a character can make the story fall flat. A character-driven story is a good thing, where the characters are actually taking action rather than the action happening to them, but that is not what I mean. The device of a character is abused when they stop serving their purpose as the eyes into the world and the story, and solely become caricatures to reflect personal struggles. They exist as they are and do not engage with the story. The biggest killer of a character, and as I will go on to explain, becomes the killer for almost all of these, is the aesthetic. If an author gets too lost in the aesthetics of a character, be that their appearance or their action, then the story will turn on its head. It will serve the characters won't serve the story. It is a very precarious balance, yet it can only be achieved when the author neglects the rest of the story elements. A story will become one-dimensional if the character has no personal motives or direction. Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby serves as the eyes of the story, but he has no motives of his own. This is a trend with most novels of its time, and it does not detract from the story because he is the only character like this. The rest are fully fleshed out. More modern pieces tend to do the opposite. Shows like Arcane, which is really popular right now, spend so much time building the aesthetics of a character like Vi, who is a rugged, tattooed ex-convict, and neglect the actual character's trauma, relationships, and views. You can create all of this information and backstory for a character and then nothing. There is no story. A reader's interpretation of the character can come from anything surrounding the character. Sometimes the nuance the author puts into the characters is lost in favor of the caricature. I will be speaking about the reader's perspective, assuming that the original source material holds, because weak characters on the author's part and weak interpretations on the reader's part are a deadly combination, and there is no point in speaking of them together when I am already talking about them separately. Most works of fiction split their main cast up in similar ways. There has to be a character that is typically smart, one that's typically funny, and one that's typically strong, and so on. A good story will not keep one character to one trait, and will have the appointed funny character say something smart once in a while, but I digress. Even if the nuance exists within these characters, and they have multiple traits that make them seem more real, the audience will pick the strongest one and only associate them with that trait. It does a disservice to the source material and the characters. The funny character will be dumbed down beyond recognition, and the smart character might become a socially inept know-it-all. When this happens, you'll see characters like Hermione Granger from Harry Potter and Annabeth Chase from Percy Jackson, both assigned to the smart character role, lumped together and called similar even though their personalities range wildly from one another. Once this nuance is stripped away, the audience won't be able to accurately understand what the story is trying to convey. The characters, again, are the eyes of the story. They are the rats you are dropping in the labyrinth of a plot to see how they would get through it. Speaking of labyrinth, the character Piranesi in Piranesi by Suzanne Clark is a very interesting character with layers of nuance and interesting character development. Piranesi is a very trusting and largely naive, but not stupid, scientist who tries his best to understand the world around him. While the setting and plot of the story are strange and largely take the front seat, I can still walk away from the novel thinking about the character and what I would have done in the situation. This is an example of a character done well. Piranesi influenced the story, and the story influenced him in a way that builds on each other. Without nuanced characters, the theme might not make sense or might be misinterpreted entirely. The point of a story is the setting. This is going to be a short section because I do not believe that setting has much to do with the story as a whole. World building is important, but if that world building doesn't affect the plot, then the setting only serves an aesthetic purpose. I do think it's important to accurately pick your setting. That isn't lost on me, but this isn't a really big issue that I've seen. As long as the setting makes sense, it's fine. If the point of your story is revolving around capitalism, then a contemporary high school setting is not going to be your best bet. Setting helps to situate the characters and set them up for the story, but it should never be overstated. A setting is just that, a setting. Tolkien might be the most popular example of excessive world building. Tolkien fans don't come at me. But a lot of his world building is relevant to the story. Chekhov's gun and all. If an author went into all that effort to describe something that is relatively useless, then the reader will feel set up. I do want to specify that the use of details does not have to be a direct plot device. Sometimes the use is fleshing out a world to make it seem more real. It just can't be excessive. Some stories are known for their setting and world building, like The Hunger Games or Harry Potter. When dealing with fantastical, non-contemporary, or period piece settings, sometimes there will be something to learn in the setting, some sort of power struggle built into the foundations. A class division is one of the most common ones. It is important that the characters bounce off the setting and nothing more. I'm leaning into plot territory now, so I will move on to that. The point of the story is the plot or an action. Most of the pleasure from a story comes from the plot. This is what hooks most readers because it is something that we can understand before we get to know and get attached to the world or the characters. There's an order of operations that a reader pays attention to, and mind you, this is just my own personal theory. While someone experiences a story, their first priority is what happens next, be that with drama or action. Their second priority will be the character's developments, but that usually only becomes a real priority when the character is at their lowest point or to show how they end off. Character development can't hold on its own. It's good, and it adds incredible nuance to a story, but it's supported on the shoulders of plot. A weak plot will redirect attention to other parts of the story that are not meant to be directed to. Too much plot will get too confusing. I do want to point out that there is a difference between a lot of plot and a lot of action. A Marvel movie has a lot of action, but not a lot of plot. Those are simple to understand. Too much plot will get too complicated. The author might get wrapped up trying to shove as many tropes and scenarios as possible, and, again, might lose sight of the theme. Tropes especially are a dicey subject. They are inevitable. Everyone has their favorite tropes, but recently people are coming out as hating tropes entirely as a concept. This is due to the fact that the publishing industry has picked up on the fact that some tropes are really popular, and if you advertise that a book includes a trope, it will be sold. The authors then try to wrestle in tropes that feel awkward with the story. Not all things fit, and it makes the plot feel clunky. Tropes are not the point of the story. They are merely there to help you enjoy your way. Plots are not something that most readers take away with nuance. Between characters and the plot, characters are much more likely to be taken as complex than a plot. We people feel as though we exist outside of the situations we are a part of, so it is easy to see characters as complex. Plot exists in a false dichotomy. It's either good or bad. You can identify what made it so, but there is usually no mix. This, above all, proves that plot is merely for pleasure. It either hits you or it doesn't. This isn't exactly accurate, however. The situations we exist in can be just as nuanced as ourselves. Plot is an exaggerated form of what could happen in real life, a long-winded what-if scenario. It can succeed in aspects while simultaneously failing in others. Deciding whether you like the plot or not will largely take away from the good or bad aspects, depending on what you decided. The plot is there to take us to the theme. This is especially clear in Odyssey-esque stories where the characters have to go on a long journey, like Avatar: The Last Airbender. The plot takes us to the theme. Even if you perceive it as bad, or it is bad, the author had made every choice for a reason. I want to touch on this briefly for a moment because I will go into more depth about authorial intention later, but this is specific to the plot. When crafting a story, little details do not crop into existence along with the important things. Every detail has been picked and thought about by the author, no matter how throwaway they were. A while back, someone made a Tumblr post stating that sometimes the curtains are just blue. They were expressing frustration with overanalyzing details in a literature class that might not matter to a book as a whole or be something that the author intended to analyze. I disagree with this. Even if the author did not intend for the color of the curtains to be relevant, it still helps build the scene. So yes, every choice is made for a reason. It is important to see that reason. Most of the time, when plot falls flat, it is because the reason was apart from serving the story and theme. When tropes are shoved in, it feels weak. When the story mostly feels like a setup for the next book or the next season, it loses the ability to stand alone as a book in its own right. This I like to call the sequel curse. In a trilogy or any series 3 or more units long, the second or second to last book will often feel like it is just setting up the next. This is why so many second books fail. The point of them is no longer the plot. The point is the aesthetic. This section is also going to be short because I only want to touch on it briefly. It is something that has only begun to crop up recently, all due to public enemy number 1, social media. Before TikTok, the types of books you read do not really say much about your intellect. There might have been some elitism from the classic readers, but it was nothing severe and nothing like the scope we see today, because today, that elitism is multiplied by 1,000,000. What more, outside of genres, the concept of an ideal reader was born. The reader who reads at least 4 books a month and has a large shelf with candles and a reading chair and cute bookmarks and highlighters and annotations. In a way, the value in a reader has become the act of reading itself and not the contents of the book. What's important is that you sit with a soft yellow lamp while it is raining and read the book, though you're not taking in anything you're reading because you're too busy thinking about how aesthetic everything is. I do think that different story elements thrive in different genres. Characters thrive in contemporary because there is no outlandish world building and the plot is character driven. Setting thrives in science fiction and fantasy where the world building has the greatest effect. Plot thrives in action and adventure. The aesthetics of a novel, ironically, thrive in dark academia. This genre is a lot more specific than the others, but it really is unique. A lot of books in the genre are filled with beautiful prose, and a staple seems to be characters that the readers don't fully know the true intentions of. I say ironically because aesthetics is the primary theme these books warn about. The Secret History, which feels like the one leading dark academia with a blazing torch, is all about what happens when a group of students get too wrapped up in their studies, ancient Greek and Roman myth, and lose touch with reality. They end up committing murder, a common theme. If We Were Villains, similarly, follows a group of characters that get too wrapped up in the archetypal Shakespeare roles they play and become them, losing their humanity in the process. Aesthetics are boring. They are. No one wants to write them and no one wants to read them. Aesthetics as a concept are not even a story element. I'm only including it because I think this should be addressed. Aesthetics purely exist because we as a generation are so used to cameras on us and to see so many cameras on others that everything we do in private must be palatable to an invisible audience. In a way, we have become the characters these books warn against. By forcing yourself in front of an invisible or not so invisible camera, we force ourselves to fit a mold that follows the cottagecore or light academia aesthetic. We have become the characters, not real people with nuance. Can you imagine trying to find nuance in real life? There's no question that our lives are anything but simple. This is how you know someone has read a book only for the aesthetic, when they talk about the aesthetic at all. The point of a story is what the author says it is. Babel by R.F. Kuang is a book where magic exists, where you translate a word from one language to another. Aside from critiquing the British Empire's use of language as a weapon, it also explains how an act of translation is an act of betrayal to the original text. It points out the gap between two languages and everything that is lost in translation. Any bilingual would know. The act of writing, of putting feelings down on paper, is translating emotions into words. Writing, an act of translation, is therefore an act of betrayal. Reading, the act of retaining and interpreting text, is then another form of translation, another form of betrayal. Here exists two places where meaning could be lost to the void. I've established that the theme of a story is the point, but what the theme is another question entirely. With the gap between the writer and the reader, what the reader interprets might not always be what the writer intends. So what then? Do we take what the author says as correct, or do we let the work stand by itself? Can we separate the art from the artist? Is death to the author real? A lot of people see these questions as the same, but I have different answers to either. We cannot separate the art from the artist, but the work must be able to stand alone. Here's what I mean. When an author writes a book, all of their unconscious biases are then in this book. With the rise of cancel culture, it has become more prevalent to either 1, separate the art from the artist if the artist is a bad person, or 2, not engage with the work entirely. What you do is entirely up to you, but it is quite impossible to do the first option. J.K. Rowling, for example, is misogynistic, and you can see that with the way she writes all of her female characters, from Hermione to Ginny to Molly Weasley. No one would ever name their one black character Shacklebolt without any nefarious intention. It is in the book. You cannot ignore the author and just take the art. It might be disappointing because you like the art, but it exists in the subtext all the same. At the same time, the work should be able to stand on its own. Everything the author has to say on a topic should be in the book. If it isn't, then the author has failed. Statements made after publication will not be interpreted along with the work. How the author wanted their work to be interpreted should be taken account, but when the author puts out a work like a novel, they are engaging in a contract. This body of work should be able to stand with no information about the author. The information in the author's interpretation should exist as bonus information to analyze the rhetoric of the piece, but never the piece itself. The author's retroactive statements should not be accepted and interpreted. An author suddenly stating that a character was imagined to be African American does no good and earns them no woke points when it was not stated or implied in the novel. Again, a real-life example would be J.K. Rowling saying, "Oh yeah, Dumbledore is gay." Because, what? The point is the theme. The point should be on your mind no matter how simple the book is. Reading is an immersive experience. You are balancing plot, characters, and setting and see where they go. Each character must have an arc representative to the theme. The plot has to serve the character development. The setting must serve the plot. There are so many different formulas for writing, but the end result should be one cohesive piece where all the elements work together to get the point across. The point is the reason the characters go through all of the hardship. It is the reason the plot tries its hardest to keep them from getting what they want. The point is the reason the story is being written, and the reason you decided to pick it up.